Hey everyone, I'm going to read a few chapters from the book You'll Be Okay, My Life with Jack Kerouac by Edie Parker, who was then the wife of Jack Kerouac at the time. So, in the book, she does talk a lot about Lucien Carr, and in one of the photos that she has, because the book has a bunch of photos like intermittently throughout. There's a picture of Jack Kerouac and Lucien Carr in front of the Columbia University fountain in 1943. And apparently she took that. But then at some point she lost the photo and it went missing. And then she didn't realize that, but it's been published in several books since. So, anyway, we're going to start in the middle of chapter 14, read chapters 14, 15, and 16. So at this point in her life, her and Jack Kerouac are at Columbia and they are settling into their new apartment in New York City. Once we had settled into the new apartment, I was able to socialize more with new friends I had made around campus. I had met a young man by the name of Lucien Carr in one of my art classes. His easel was placed to the right and a little in back of me, but he caught my eye as much as the model. He was taller than Jack and had a thick head of curly, dirty blonde hair. I couldn't keep my eyes off him, and I noticed that the other girls were also looking at him. He really should have been on the model stand just as he was, very sloppily dressed with a white cotton shirt, opened at the neck. It had never seen starch, and his sleeves were rolled so tightly that you knew he had taken scissors to them. He wore khaki pants with the legs rolled up and loafers with no socks. Carr seemed to be very intent on his work and noticed nothing else. Then, all of a sudden, he let out a loud whistle and said, "Not bad, not bad," admiring his own sketch. Later, he walked around the room and looked at everyone's work, completely at ease, not noticing the attention he was attracting. I was spellbound by him. He moved like a cat. His movements were like mercury over rocks. His eyes were slanted, almost oriental, and pure green, so green they dazzled you. Above all, he was unaware of the effect he had on the girls, which made him all the more attractive. As he continued to look at every drawing and each person, he'd say things like, "Great," or something nice. You had the feeling that he was interested in you, not himself. When he got to my easel, he stood for a long time in complete silence, so I glanced up and noticed that he was looking at me and not my work. Just then, the professor called a break, and Lucien offered me a cigarette, and from then on, we were fast friends. I made friends with Lucien's girlfriend, Celine Young. She was a lot like me. We had the same background and we dressed in the same way: skirts, saddles, sweaters, and pink Oxford cloth men's shirts from Brooks Brothers. She was taller than me, maybe 5'5", and had nice boobs, solidly built. Celine had a shining glow to her complexion and wore very little makeup, just lipstick and Helena Rubinstein bluegrass cologne. Her greatest asset was her gorgeous, slightly curly, natural blonde hair, which I envied. From the beginning, I thought she was a terrific gal. Celine, like anyone who is attractive and has the world by the tail, loved to flirt. She had big blue eyes and was full of energy and fun. That's why Lucien adored her so much. They both really fit their looks, their spirit, their bubbling gaiety. Another of Lucien's classmates named Allen Ginsberg also began hanging out with our crowd around the West End bar, and before very long, Allen had met Jack. Allen is difficult to describe. He was younger than all of us. He was 17 to our 20 years, which is a big gap at that time of your life. He was very naive in many ways and also looked undernourished or underdeveloped. He had small, wiry legs and arms, too long for his body. Allen was always moving, and his large Charlie Chaplin ears stuck out from his head. He reminded me of an Arab with his oily hair and watery eyes, and he had a habit of pushing his dark-framed, horn-rimmed glasses back onto his nose. Allen was a sympathizer, and everyone went to him with their troubles, even though he wanted you to feel sorry for his lot in life. Jack would sometimes say, "Look out, Allen will pounce on you like a spider with many legs and then you'll be done for." That seldom happened, though, for he realized his neediness was not a charming quality. In spite of that, Allen could be and was sweet, and he was always there for you. Usually, Allen told you what you wanted to hear. He seemed to have an intelligent tongue and an uncanny sixth sense of how to win his personal war with life. You couldn't help but love him because you really felt he loved you too. Sometimes, after you left him, you had doubts, though. He could have been a great politician. Anyway, he chose to be friends with Kerouac, Burroughs, and Lucien instead of women. Many of the girls were attracted to Allen for his little boy qualities. Everyone developed a lasting friendship with another of Lucien's friends named William S. Burroughs. He was also from St. Louis and talked with a slow drawl. Burroughs was a combination of Sherlock Holmes, Wyatt Earp, and Abraham Lincoln. He dressed like Holmes, he was fascinated with guns like Earp, and he was kind and soft-spoken like Lincoln. He was also sexless like all three. William was like the cavalry. He always came to the rescue, but there was never anyone there to come to his rescue. One night, Celine Young, John Kingsland, Lucien Carr, and I decided to go see the English Royal Ballet to Swan Lake. John Kingsland was a Columbia student from Brooklyn Heights who lived in a room in the dorms, next door to Lucien. John was a very good-looking, suave New Yorker from a wealthy family, and Carr, also from a wealthy background, came from St. Louis. Kingsland knew his way around town, and in fact, it was he who had gotten the tickets for us. Our seats turned out to be way up in the nearly empty balcony, and as the lights went down, Lucien produced a bottle of wine which he passed around. The original plan was to go out someplace elegant to eat afterwards, but we proceeded to get looped and ignore the performance. The stage was a mile away, so I suggested we move closer. As we headed down, I'm afraid we disturbed the few people that were there and then got completely lost in all the corridors. The place was a labyrinth of monstrously long corridors lined with doors that led off to the private boxes. I recall that the carpet was wine-colored with black medallions and looked like a hopscotch pattern, which inspired us to jump wildly from square to square. Lucien stole someone's cape from the cloakroom of the private boxes and impersonated the Phantom of the Opera, taking Celine's eyebrow pencil and drawing a handlebar mustache on himself. We wandered around the corridors until the music stopped and the halls filled up with foreign-speaking ballet performers, most of whom were Russian. They didn't pay any attention to us at all. They were so scantily dressed that I felt we had joined a bunch of nudists. Since they were all wearing white tights with feathers in their hair and on their tails, they looked like huge white rock chickens to me. We followed them backstage to a champagne fountain that sat on a long table covered with the crystal champagne glasses and a huge bowl of black caviar, lemon wedges, and small crackers. Everyone dove in and helped themselves. It was crazy because no one could communicate. We got even more smashed and danced and carried on. When the dancers disappeared to change into their street clothes, we decided it was time to leave. Our escape route was a huge freight elevator, filled with an assortment of cleaning equipment, and someone, I think myself, said, "Let's take this vacuum cleaner home to Joan. She would love it as a gift." It was one of those big upright models, but Lucien was game and dragged it with us through the dark, wet streets. When we boarded a crowd uptown bus, no one even looked surprised to see us, drunk and laughing with our vacuum and the Phantom of the Opera. Chapter 15. After a brief stay with me at home, the time came when Jack was posted to another ship. Joan had got back to her family's home in Albany to have her baby. I think that's William S. Burroughs' wife. It was Saturday, and Jack did not have to stand watch until the following Monday on the 4 p.m. to midnight shift. So Lucien, Celine, Jack, and I discussed what we would do until then. We decided to see the movie Lost Weekend, which was based on a book we all read together. It was the first time, to my knowledge, that alcoholism was treated as a sickness and not blight. Jackson's book was excellent, Jack said, as he debated the finer points with Lucien, Allen Ginsberg, and John Kingsland. By that time, my father was well on his way into the bottle, and so I had a lot to add to the discussion. They always listened to me, which was their way with anyone who had something to contribute. Then Lucien suggested, "Let's go down to the village and see Bill Burroughs, maybe go for Chinese?" So off we all went to the subway. Jack said, "I hope we don't run into David Kammerer," and we all agreed. Years earlier, Kammerer had been Lucien's Boy Scout troop leader in St. Louis. The older man had fallen in love with good-looking Lucien and had followed him around the country from one school to another. I always felt that David was creepy and might as well have had cloven hooves and horns growing out of thick, curly red hair. He was the dark cloud that hovered over our lives. David was tall, nearly 6 feet, with muscular long legs. He looked disheveled, like he had never had time to zip his fly. Wherever he went, he almost ran, walking with his coat and hair flying. When he climbed the stairs to our apartment, he took them 2 at a time. Wringing his hands in full speed anxiety, he was breathless when he spoke. All his waking energy was directed at Lucien, half his age. He drove us all to silence because all he ever wanted to talk about was Lucien. As a result, it was best not to say anything at all around him. Needless to say, he was uncomfortable to be around, so we avoided him. In fact, Burroughs was the only person who could tolerate him. We got off the train at Sheridan Square and went straight over to Bill's apartment, but no one was there, so we went to see Lost Weekend at the early show. Celine and I went into the lobby while Jack and Lucien got in line for tickets. While Celine had a smoke, she asked me when I was going to go to Ashbury Park. I told her sister would be coming too, and invited her to come and visit us there. Then Lucien and Jack came to collect us, and we sat down front, seats Jack liked, so he could look up at the people on the screen. He used to say it was so he could, quote, see every pimple on their face and every cavity in their mouth. I remember that the picture was in black and white, and it was just a story of a poor, sober drunk who only wanted another drink. When the movie was over, everyone sat quietly while the lights came on. Then ever so slowly, we got up and left. Ray Millen had done a fabulous job. Myrna Loy, his girl in the movie, was also superb in her part. We walked to Sheridan Square after the show and commented on how everyone was rushing into all the bars. We weren't eager to get into the heavy drinking, so to speak, so we had a pitcher of beer at Minetta's. Alex Katz came in. Since it was the weekend, it was a big night for his business. He had his little stool and easel and made pencil sketches of people. If they were enthusiastic about what he did, he would try to make an appointment to do an oil painting of his subject. He was very good at it. He sketched us all. My sister still has the one of herself. A little later, William Burroughs and David Kammerer found us. They were older, both in their early 30s to our late teens, but age means nothing to your brain, only your ego. As per usual, Kammerer kept leering at Carr. This was my first conscious encounter with a man in love with another man. If it hadn't turned out so tragically, it would have been comical. For his part, Lucien was very much in love with Celine. They were always touching, entwined, or wrestling with each other. Burroughs disgustedly called them flaming youth. Bill was certainly not one to show his affections in front of others, and neither was Jack, for that matter. When Jack went to the John, or head as we called it in wartime, Dave grabbed his chair, which was between me and Lucien. Lucien and I both spoke at once. That's Kerouac's seat. Then Lucien added, beat it. Kammerer just stood up and went back to where he had been. It didn't even faze him. My God, he was a pest. We decided to have Chinese food, but wanted to get rid of Dave first, so Lucien said that he had forgotten his wallet back at school. David took the bait and offered to go get it for him. I noticed Lucien slip his wallet to Celine under the table, but Dave was on the other side of the table and didn't see it. We told him that we would be at a Chinese restaurant on Bleecker Street when he got back. I should have felt sorry for him. Kammerer had everything going for him. Intelligence, money, physique, but he was blind when it came to Lucien. He acted like a groupie around some superstar. It was sickening and hard to take. Burroughs was the only one who held any compassion for him at all, I guess because they had been friends back in St. Louis. Bill never showed his feelings, pro or con. As soon as the pitcher of beer was gone, we got up to leave and Lucien hailed a cab. The five of us got in, Bill up front with the driver. Lucien said, Chinatown, which is far from Bleecker Street. Jack started to chuckle about Dave, and that was that. No one said boo. Bill paid the cab fare. He was nice that way. In the heart of Chinatown, we went into a restaurant with a downstairs and upstairs. They had large paper Chinese lanterns hanging from the ceiling, oak floors, and huge round wooden tables with captain's chairs to seat 10. We took a table on the first floor of the Grand Chinese Palace and discovered that the noise above us was deafening. It was the restaurant's custom to encourage the college kids to sing till the chandeliers dropped. They were singing with all their lung power right then. We ordered 3 pitchers of beer and a group dinner for 5 with wonton soup and egg rolls to start. Jack loved Chinese food, especially the pork dishes. We all liked hot mustard, so the waiter was always running back for more mustard. Lucien addressed him as, my good man. We ordered another round of beer and sat back to listen to the singing. For a change, they were very good, singing their school songs. The boys from Harvard sang Whiff and Poof song, and we joined in when it was Columbia's turn to sing Who Owns New York. After the meal, the waiter came and asked us for our food stamps, then presented us with a check. We all tore out our ration stamps and chipped in some money with Bill paying the most. I assume this is from school. He carried a cane with a stiletto knife inside it that sprang out with a twist of the ornate silver dog's head handle. He demonstrated how it worked and stood up and brandished his sword with such enthusiasm that the Chinamen were horrified and ran. Afraid for their pigtails, Bill remarked, and we fell into stitches of laughter. Jack said a la W.C. Fields, "Put your weapons away, my good man, or we shall never receive our change." He did, and the poor waiter brought it over meekly. Before long, we were gone into the hot August night, heading toward our unforeseen, tragic destiny. We walked to the subway, and Burroughs headed back to his apartment in the village where I hoped Kammerer would join him. When we reached our stop, Lucien and Celine went over to the West End bar, and Jack and I went back to our apartment, climbing the 5 flights to the 6th floor. Woofit greeted us there along with our cat, Kit Kat. I thought about Joan being away to have her baby, and I recall feeling a small amount of inadequacy because of my abortion. Jack had never spoken of it after that one blow-up when he first found out. From then on, he maintained a grim determination not to speak of it again, his what's done is done attitude. We put Woofit on her leash and went back down to the street where we walked up Morningside Drive and into the park to let her run. She never went far away, which was good. Black dog, black night. It was still hot, so we decided to sit on a bench at the top of Morningside Park, hoping whatever breeze there would hit us. Or whatever breeze there was would hit us. Then suddenly, out of the darkness, Kammerer came running toward us in an open, dark gray, badly fitting trench coat. He was perspiring, wringing his hands, frantically asking, "Where is Lucien?" Jack lied and told him that we'd left him in the village and he supposed he was at Bill's. Dave said he must be wrong. He had just come from there. Jack shrugged his shoulders as if to say, "I don't know." Then I said something mean, which I have regretted because of what happened next. "He's probably with Celine in her dorm at Barnard. You know Lucien. He gets in anywhere. Doors are too conventional." With that, Dave streaked off in a panic, as if I had said Lucien was cavorting with the devil. That was the last time I ever saw Dave Kammerer alive. I learned later that in the early morning hours of August 14th, 1944, Kammerer found Lucien in the West End. They were drinking together until the bar closed and then wound up together in Riverside Park. According to reports, Kammerer made threats against Celine and sexual advances toward Lucien. Lucien took out his Boy Scout knife and stabbed Kammerer several times in the heart, then weighted his body and pushed it into the Hudson River. Lucien needed advice and went to Bill's apartment, but Bill advised him to get a good lawyer. Jack and I were sleeping on a double mattress in the middle of the living room floor the next morning when in popped Lucien. He had the same clothes on as the night before, and he looked terrible, as if he had had a lover's quarrel with Celine, I thought. Lucien threw himself down on the couch right next to us and mumbled something like, "I just got rid of..." He tossed something on the glass-top cocktail table and repeated the statement again. "I just got rid of the old lady." Then he quoted a passage from Shakespeare. I was still half asleep, so Jack nudged me and said, "I think you better make some coffee." When I came back, they were both sitting on the couch speaking in low whispers. There was a pair of horn-rimmed glasses on the cocktail table. I didn't think much about it at the time. I thought they were Lucien's. Since I was up, I went into the bathroom to wash and get ready for the day. When I came out, they were still on the couch, and Lucien looked like he was going to cry. He was so distraught. I asked him if he was all right and began to feel the anxiety in the room. Jack and Lucien finished their coffee and got up to leave. I said, "Do you want breakfast?" "No, we'll get it out," Jack said, and went into the John while Lucien stood outside in the hall looking half dead. I could feel that something was very wrong, but I thought it was Celine. I approached Lucien and held his hand until Jack came back and started down the stairs. Suddenly, Jack turned around and came back to give me a kiss. He said he'd be gone for a while, but that he'd try to get back before his watch began on his ship at 4. That left me to walk Woofit, and while I decided to call Joan in Albany and tell her that I thought Lucien had split up with Celine after some terrible fight, I headed for the Columbia bookstore to use the phone, but the store hadn't opened yet, so I waited and got my call through to Joan. She couldn't understand my concern, so the conversation turned to more mundane matters like bills to pay, rent due, and so on. As I walked home, I realized that the heat of the day hadn't settled in yet. It felt as if it were going to rain. The sky was overcast, the air was muggy, and if you stuck your tongue out for a time, it was kind of salty. Occasionally, New York City feels like a seaport, and this was one of those days. On the way back, I stopped at Graham's, knowing she would be getting up and we could go down to the tea room for breakfast. I gave Woofit to Ward to watch for a minute and went upstairs. Graham was alone, all dressed up with a hat and gloves when I came in. She was stunning to look at, always dressed elegantly. I sat there feeling a bond between Graham and me, which she must have noticed, for she asked, "Are you and Jack planning on getting married?" I was usually very secretive with my family until then. They had a way of throwing things back at me later. But this time I answered, "Yeah, I guess so." She became angry and said, "After what he did, I would think you would get rid of him or marry him, one or the other." Immediately, I could tell she was sorry she had said that, but I got up and left. When I got out on the street, I wished we hadn't argued. Chapter 16. Back at the apartment, I did my chores. I made the bed and did the dishes and then made coffee, which I put in the refrigerator for later. John Kingsland dropped over, commenting on the hot weather. "Where's Jack?" he asked. I told him he had gone out with Lucien, and then we talked about what he had been doing that summer. John stayed with his family in Brooklyn Heights for most of the vacation. As a student at Columbia in the spring, he had been spending his spare time with Joan. John was very likable and close to Jack, Joan, and Lucien. While he and Lucien lived in the dorms, they had met Allen Ginsberg, who roomed on the same floor. Although John and Allen were the same age, it was hard to believe because John was so much more mature in every way. John wanted to know if Celine was coming in from Pelham, but I said I never knew. She hadn't mentioned it last night. Then we talked about Joan and her problems. He sure missed her, as we all did. Through it all, I kept wondering where Jack could be. It was getting to be lunchtime. John suggested we go see a movie and cool off in an air-conditioned theater, but I wanted to wait for Jack since he said he'd stop back before going on to watch. Then John asked when we planned on getting married, since he knew that we were going to get our blood tests done for our marriage license. I told him Jack wanted to get married in Lowell, even though his parents were now living in Ozone Park, Queens, having moved there to be closer to him just the year before. I really didn't care where the wedding was held, as long as it was kept quiet. I knew my allowance from home would definitely stop if my mother found out I was married. After a while, John left, and I continued to wait. So on this page of the book, page 140, there is an image of Lucien Carr and Celine Young together in 1944. And Lucien is wearing a suit and tie and coat, and then Celine is wearing a dress with her curly hair. Shortly after John went out, Celine came into the apartment. She said she had been at the Columbia Fountain waiting for Lucien and asked if I had seen him, so I told her the strange events earlier that morning. Celine said that she and Lucien had ended up at the West End bar when they left us the night before. Since she had to get to bed early, she had left Lucien there. As she was leaving, she noticed that Kammerer was seated at the bar, leering at them. When she walked out, he probably went over to Lucien. "Was Lucien loaded?" I asked. "Who can tell when he acts up?" she said. We both wondered what had happened after she left him. Then, still tired, Celine went off to take a nap before dinner. I stopped at the grocer's and got some fresh supplies for dinner and thought about John Kingsland, who seemed especially lost while Joan was away. I hoped things would get better soon, the war might end or Jack's writing would bear fruit. I dreamed of nothing but marriage and living in Paris on his royalties. My thoughts turned to the mail, so I hurried home. I was curious because I had been sending Jack stories to all of the monthly magazines and Collier's hadn't replied yet. Maybe they would buy one of them. But there were no letters and no Jack either. I took a bath to cool off, then rested and waited. For dinner, I prepared tomato aspic in a round donut mold and a tuna salad marinated in Italian dressing with onions and celery, all on a bed of lettuce. That was one of Jack and Lucien's favorite meals. Allen Ginsberg dropped in, so I made some tea and small tuna salad sandwiches for us to nibble on. Allen had iced tea with lemon and mentioned how nice it was and how my tea wasn't like President Butler's tea parties, the president of Columbia, and we snickered. He started to tell me what he was reading, as usual, and was very animated about it. He recited a long poem from memory, and it was very dramatic the way he did it. He, Jack, and Lucien were into Rimbaud, and had just started reading the works of Celine. Celine, it's different. There's an accent on the E, unlike Celine's, his girlfriend. I told Allen how much I appreciated his suggestions and instructions, and how stimulated by our student-teacher relationship I was. When he got up to go, he said something that was eerie in light of later events. He described a dream he'd had of an impending disaster in which the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse rode over the rooftops of Columbia. When he looked out the window, he saw their teeth bared and gleaming and their horsemen's cloaks flying. The image made us both shiver. Allen left, and I read Dos Passos when I finished my tea. At long last, Jack came back. He walked over and looked down at me solemnly, and without saying a word, went in to take a shower. He called out from the bathroom, "Edie, please get me a change of clothes," which I did. Jack dressed as I started to get our meal ready in the kitchen. I put a cloth over the cocktail table and lit some candles. Then I laid out the salad and snacks along with some lemonade I'd just made. Jack had been drinking and was tired, so he stretched out on the couch on top of a clean white sheet that covered it. He said he had some news. He had told the purser that he wouldn't be on his watch that night or the next so that we could go on to the doctor on West End Avenue for our blood tests. "Okay," I said, dumbstruck with astonishment. We'd been talking about marriage since I lost the baby, but I wanted to be certain he wasn't doing it out of moral obligation. We talked for a while about our plans to get married. We decided to wait for Joan to come back with her new baby and then could take the dog and cat to my mother's in Grosse Pointe. Couldn't we leave Kit Kat at your mother's? I asked him. No, he said, there's too much traffic and things like that. It's not good for the cat. After our trip, we'd returned to New York where I could work in the factories doing war work, which I liked. Jack's atonement check would help pay the rent on the apartment with Joan, and we would save whatever we had left to get to Paris after the war. As I talked about the future, with the classical symphony on the phonograph in the background, Jack fell asleep on the couch. I went over to the mattress on the floor and laid down next to him. We had a shelf for the books our apartment reading club was currently discussing: T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, Henry Miller, Jack London, and many others. I hadn't yet finished Dos Passos, so I picked that up to continue and fell asleep reading. I didn't wake up until early the next morning, and Jack was already making the coffee. He called out, "Rise and shine." Since he was taking the day off, he wanted to do something special. I said, "So early?" It was still around 7 a.m. He suggested we go see his folks or go to Ashbury Park or just do something in the city, like cool off in a movie theater. It all sounded great to me, so I dressed quickly as Jack took Whiffet for a walk. In no time, he was back, and we took the subway to Times Square and went into Bickford's for breakfast of corned beef, hash, and eggs. Jack said we'd walk over to the Central Park Zoo and watch them feed the big cats, which we both loved to do. We stayed there for an hour just enjoying the cool shade of the trees. As we sat on the bus heading home after the blood tests, Jack was unusually quiet. He held my hand tighter than normal. I asked if something was wrong, but he said, "No, nothing. Let's get off at the Thalia and see a movie." As luck would have it, the first show was letting out. The next show started just as we sat down and began munching on our Fifth Avenue candy bars. Lowell Thomas came on with a travelogue about India, followed by the Path newsreel full of war footage. This feature happened to be a French movie with English subtitles. I didn't recognize the actors, but Jack did. He and his mother were great French movie fans. They really enjoyed them. I continually asked Jack what they were really saying, and he patiently told me since the dubbing left much to be desired. How he stood all the interruptions of me questioning him while keeping track of what was going on up on the screen, I'll never know, but he did. When the movie let out, I was hungry, so we dropped in for a chicken sandwich and a glass of beer on the way home, which I had to pay for. When I asked him where Lucien was, Jack obviously didn't want to talk about anything he considered gossipy, and we walked back in silence. Jack was even more quiet than usual. Broadway, late at night, was bursting with people. Even though most of the streetlights were out except at the corners during wartime, I couldn't help but notice that most of the men, whether young or old, were in uniform. Jack was wearing his merchant marine khakis, shirt, pants, black shoes, and white socks, and that old beaten-up seaman's hat. I was sure proud of him, and it made me feel especially good when other women stared at him hungrily. He never seemed to take notice. Kingsland had the fan going and was reading Proust on the sofa when we walked in. It was close to midnight by then and a lot cooler. Joan had been trying to get everyone to read Proust so she could discuss his books. John commented that he liked him even though he was dry and difficult to relate to at times. That kind of comment usually got Jack going on long intellectual talks about writing and books, but not tonight. He went into the bathroom for a shower, and John left, a bit hurt. When we went to bed that night, Jack called out for me to lock the door. I was surprised because it was something we never did. After all, who would climb all those stairs? When I went to bed, Jack held out his arms and said, "I want to make love to you, so you will always think of us here and now." I fell into his beauty, never dreaming what very, very real events lay ahead. Okay, so for the rest of the time, there's the police that come and check them out and then kind of take them to the cell. So right after chapter 17, on the page, there's an image of a newspaper clipping of Lucien Carr and the David Kammerer murder. But anyways, it says, "Student is silent on slaying friend." That's the title. Held without bail after he listens lackadaisically to charge in stabbing case. And then it says, held for homicide, Lucien Carr as he was arraigned yesterday, the New York Times. So yeah. It says, clasping a copy of A Vision, a philosophic work by W.B. Yeats under one arm, Lucien Carr, 19-year-old Columbia sophomore, listened lackadaisically to the proceeding as he was arraigned yesterday morning before Magistrate Anna M. Cross in Homicide Court. He was held without bail for a hearing on August 29th. The pale, slender youth showed little interest as Detective James O'Brien presented a short affidavit charging him with the homicide for having fatally stabbed, on Monday, David Kammerer, 33-year-old former instructor at Washington University, St. Louis, with whom he had been friendly. His attorney, Vincent J. Malone, told the court that the defendant had nothing to say. Court asks psychiatric test. Magistrate Cross asked Mr. Malone whether he had any objection to having Carr sent to Bellevue Hospital for psychiatric observation at this time. Mr. Malone replied that he did object and would prefer to have the case follow the usual channels. Jacob Grummett, assistant district attorney in charge of the Homicide Bureau, also objected to the proposal, saying that that should be done in the Court of General Sessions. Exclaiming that we in the great state of New York still proceed under the early theory of the 18th century justice, Magistrate Cross declared that this procedure would result in a great loss of time. She said that the procedure she had suggested would be valuable in something. Looks like it's cut off, but then it says Day, appearing greatly concerned at the high bail set, he pleaded, Lucien, with Judge Sullivan to reduce it to a point that his parents, who live in Ozone Park, Queens, might be able to meet. They'll take very good care of you in the new city prison, Judge Sullivan assured him as he was led away. No, that might be about Jack, actually. Kammerer's parents prominent. Special in the New York Times. St. Louis, August 16th. David Kammerer was the son of socially prominent Mr. and Mrs. Alfred L. Kammerer of Clayton, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis. His father is a consulting engineer. The son was graduated from John Burroughs School here in 1929 and from Washington University in 1933. After some teaching experience, he returned to the university and obtained a master's degree in 1938. He specialized in English, and for a time he was an instructor in that subject and in physical education. His father said that he had done some study toward a doctorate at Columbia, but recently had been tutoring and was not connected with that institution. Mr. Kammerer said that he had received a letter from his son last week in which he wrote of a pleasant meeting with Lucien Carr, a friend he had known for some time. Ooh. Okay, there's another newspaper clipping with a picture of David Kammerer. It says David Eames Kammerer under it, and the title is Columbia Student Kills Friend and Sinks Body in Hudson River by Frank S. Adams. A fantastic story of a homicide first revealed to the authorities by the voluntary confession of a 19-year-old Columbia sophomore was converted yesterday from a nightmarish fantasy into a horrible reality by the discovery of the bound and stabbed body of the victim in the murky waters of the Hudson River. For 24 hours previously, the police and the district attorney's office, balked by the absence of a body or a particle of evidence corroborating the commission of any crime, had detained the self-proclaimed slayer without a charge. He stayed in the district attorney's office, peacefully reading poetry most of the night. But with the discovery of the body yesterday afternoon, which the slender, studious youth unshakingly identified as it was lifted from the water, and after he had led detectives to the spot where he had buried his victim's eyeglasses in Morningside Park, the investigators knew that they were dealing with a real homicide and not the imaginings of an overstrained mind. Lucien Carr, 19 years old, son of a family formerly prominent in St. Louis but now living in this city, was the youth who admitted the killing. The authorities said that he was the son of Russell Carr, and then it says continued on page 13, but it does not have the full clipping. There's another newspaper clipping on page 203 that says, student is indicted in 2D degree murder. I guess that means second degree. Lucien Carr, 19-year-old Columbia University sophomore, was indicted yesterday for a second-degree murder in the stabbing of David Kammerer, 33, on August 14th. At the same time, the police revealed that they had uncovered a second material witness, William Seward Burroughs, 30, of 69 Bedford Street. I don't know why they put the addresses back in the day in the newspaper, but anyway. He is free in bail of $2,500 set by General Sessions Judge John J. Sullivan, before whom young Carr will plead to the indictment Tuesday. Burroughs, the police said, admitted that after Carr had stabbed Kammerer, former college instructor, and then weighted his body with rocks and tossed it into the Hudson River, he had heard the story from the youth and had done nothing because Carr said he was on his way to surrender. It was almost 24 hours later before Carr gave himself up. After Carr had told Burroughs, he repeated the story to John Kerouac, former Columbia student, who had been held as a material witness in default of $5,000 bail. The police escorted Kerouac to the municipal building on Tuesday to witness his marriage to Miss Edie Parker of Detroit, and then took him back to the Bronx prison. And there is here another newspaper clipping on page 243. Student slayer sent to the reformatory. Lucien Carr, the 20-year-old Columbia University Engineering School student who last August confessed the slaying of David Kammerer, 33, former teacher of English and physical education in Washington University, St. Louis, was sentenced yesterday in general sessions to Elmira Reformatory for first-degree manslaughter. He had stabbed Kammerer, a homosexual, on the embankment of Riverside Park at 115th Street, and had confessed the killing to the police more than 24 hours before the body was found floating in the Hudson River of August 16th. Judge George L. Donnellan, in imposing the sentence, said he felt there was a chance for the rehabilitation of young Carr by sending him to the reformatory rather than to Sing Sing, where he could not avoid coming in contact with hardened criminals. The court warned him, however, that, while it would be possible for the youth to obtain his freedom from the reformatory in 18 months, he would be shifted to Sing Sing to serve a possible 15-year term if he did not comply with the reformatory regulations. Assistant District Attorney Jacob Grummett told the court that because the knife used in the killing had not been recovered by the police and there was no eyewitness, a second-degree murder conviction could not be obtained. Carr, who had been indicted for second-degree murder, pleaded guilty on the manslaughter charge. So it turns out he did go to reformatory where he behaved, and he was there for 18 months. And then once he got out of reformatory, he worked as an editor, a news editor, and had a stable 50-year-long career, and he stayed out of the spotlight. Anyway, those are all the passages I could find in Edie Parker's You'll Be Okay on Lucien Carr. So here's that classic photo of Jack Kerouac on the left and Lucien Carr on the right, posing at the Columbia Fountain. This version's a little fuzzy, but it was taken by Edie Parker. And here's another photo of Lucien and his girlfriend at the time, Celine Young. And thanks for listening.